Welcome to our lesson on heat transfer. In today's lesson, you want to keep the following questions in mind as you are listening and taking notes. So these would be considered your learning targets. So we're looking for things like how is temperature measured, in what 3 ways is heat transferred, and how is heat transferred in the troposphere. So those are the things you want to keep in mind as you view today. Okay, so if you look at heat transfer and you look at what they talked about, heat is transferred in 3 different ways. One way is radiation, the second way is conduction, and the third way is convection. So if you look at this diagram, it shows you all 3. You see radiation coming off of the flames. You see convection, which is inside the pot. You can see that it's actually swirling. That's what convection is, and we'll talk about that in just a few minutes. And then conduction is this nice handle is getting hot. And so that's kind of a transfer of energy. But again, we will get to that in just a minute. So, if we look at radiation more specifically, radiation is the direct transfer of electromagnetic waves. So, for example, the sun's rays warming your face would be an example of radiation. So, it's a direct transfer of that energy to your face. The heat coming off the flame of the burner is another example for you. When we look at conduction, it's the direct transfer of heat from one substance to another that is touching. So, for example, when you're walking barefoot in hot sand, the sand has been heated by the sun, but your feet are what's touching the sand. And so because your feet are touching the sand, or the sand is touching your feet, it's basically an indirect, it's a direct transfer, but it's through conduction. So that heat is being conducted through the sand to your feet. And so when you look at conduction, really, it's those molecules we said that were moving. They're moving very quickly if they're hot. And when they're hot, they're moving quickly and they bump into slower moving molecules. And as they bump into them, they transfer some of their energy into the slower moving molecule, and it increases the movement of that slower moving molecule. So it's important to remember that warm things, or hot energy, or more energy, is actually transferred into things that have less energy or that have less heat. A third way that heat is transferred is convection, and that's really transferring heat by the movement of a fluid. So when we talk about fluids, in this case, we're really talking about gases or liquids. And so in our picture here, you see that there's a liquid in the pan. And so as heat rises, it actually kind of separates. Those molecules are bouncing up against each other, and as they're doing that, they are knocking into each other and spreading out. So as they spread out, they become less dense, and things that are less dense tend to rise, and that's why hot air rises. And as the hot air rises, it kind of takes the place of that cold air, and the colder air actually sinks because it's more dense, that those molecules are closer together. And so because of that, just like gravity, it's going to sink, or it's going to be kind of pushed out of the way. And so that cold air ends up coming down, and as it comes down, it gets heated, and the stuff that was heated before and gets up top is a little bit less warm, and it's just kind of a cycle that you'll see. And we see that in the atmosphere as well. So when we look at heating in the troposphere, heating happens in 3 ways. We have radiation, so we have radiation directly from the sun heating the Earth's surface. You have conduction, so basically as the Earth's surface is heating, then the air around it is actually getting heated because of the surface, so that's conduction. And then convection is as that air is heated, the warmer air rises, and as it rises, it actually pushes the cold air down. So how is temperature measured? Take a second and pause and go ahead and see if you can answer this question on your own. Well, if you remember correctly, temperature is measured using a thermometer. Remember the thermometer, basically the liquid inside expands when things are heated. So when those molecules get heated, they kind of start bouncing around and they expand. And so they get larger, and so it increases the temperature on the thermometer. But as they cool down, the molecules tend to slow down and they get closer together. And so if it's a liquid thermometer, it actually has the liquid dropping in level, and so it reads as a colder temperature. So if you look at the second one, and again, pause for a second and see if you can answer it. In what 3 ways is heat transferred? Well, heat is transferred through radiation, which is direct transfer, through conduction, which is direct transfer from one substance to another that it's touching, And then convection, that's the transfer of heat through a fluid, so a liquid or a gas. So in our example with the pot, we had a liquid inside the pot, but when we look at the troposphere, we're talking about the air that's in the atmosphere, and so that it would be our gases. Last question, how is heat transferred in the troposphere? Well, it's a little bit of a process here, but it starts out with the sun's radiation heating up the Earth's surface. And as a result of that, the land becomes warmer than the air. And then the air near the surface is heated by the radiation and by conduction. So only the first few meters of the air are really heated by conduction. So the air closer to the ground is usually warmer than the air a few meters up. So in the troposphere, the air is usually heated through convection then. So the air that's up higher is heated through convection. So the air near the ground moves more rapidly as it's heated. And so because of that, the molecules basically bump into one another and spread farther apart, becoming less dense and rising. And as it rises, it basically runs into the colder air or the cooler air. And because the cooler air is more dense and the warmer air is taking its place, then the cooler air sinks and basically takes the place of the warmer air. And that should do it for us for today. Thanks for listening.